Welcome, everybody, to another episode of GovCon Intelligence. We're recording the week after the 8A data call, and I just posted an article about the importance of Alaska Native corporations in the 8A program in the light of the video posted by Secretary Pete Hegseth, the Department of War. And I'm really pleased to have a good friend who knows a lot about Alaska Native corporations. Christine Williams is the principal at Outlook Law, and she has been an adjunct law professor at the Seattle University School of Law Alaska campus. She's a fellow in the American Bar Foundation. She's been a member of SBA's National Regulatory Fairness Board. She's also been named one of the top 50 lawyers in government contracting in Alaska. Prior to Outlook Law, she's been a vice president and general counsel for Alaska Native Regional Corporation, as well as a partner at major big law firms. So, Christine, first of all, I wanted to thank you for coming on the show. How was the 8A data call for you? How did that turn out?
It was awful. It was awful from start to finish. So the overall impressions awful, but there were bright spots. Like they did extend the deadlines and then they put it on a holiday as the due date. The platform wasn't equipped to handle larger contracts. It got very slow. It would time out for stuff. The clarifications I found were not issued. I was distressed by SBA issuing a proclamation that it was not proprietary and confidential data. I didn't find that to be helpful, or you don't want to give your secret sauce up to somebody that says we're not going to protect it. And I think with the recent Politico story of that, there could be some questions going around about the government and people going in and reviewing data and social security numbers being exposed. These are real facts. That was a story that broke yesterday. And so I think this information is generally guarded by SBA. And for that statement to come out was very shocking, and grateful for you guys for publicizing how much that data call cost, because what they didn't take into account and is how much time these firms had to spend not getting work. And so it may cost X amount to do the data call. It's going to triple that amount because they can't do the work in the way that
Because
it's
there were proposals due that same
right.
week or they're this week, and you're taking
Right.
time away from working on the
Yeah.
proposals
And
to
I
submit the data call.
represent tribes in both the continental US and in Alaska and ANCs, and everybody was having the issue. So it
Mhm.
seems like the portal was set up for individually owned. And again, one email address, one person uploading, and it wasn't a good fit. And I think it was at best in a beta phase. And I think the real concern that I have on these for all my clients and for for 8A program participants in general is that this is going to return a massive amount of false positives. And I
Tell me
think
about that.
when you have such a low level of fraud in a program, you're already going to have raised the risk of a false positive. And the way that they're scrubbing the data, I just don't see how they're going to get there with what they're trying to get there or what their stated goals are. I'm just not sure what they're going to get. And my guess is we're going to have a spectrum, and a lot of it's going to be clickbait. And we've seen this
Hmm.
recently where people, why don't you talk about how much the $550 million in fraud was, Sam?
I came out with an article saying that the most that I could find was 22,000, maybe $10 million, but certainly not 550 million. And with respect to looking at these submissions and going through the fraud investigations, the same time that SBA was getting these data call responses. By the way, some people actually submitted before the second round of
Right.
FAQs came out. So I don't know
That's
what
right.
happens to those people. But while this was coming out, the news came out that SBA had awarded a contract to Palantir to do some sort of fraud pilot program. Is there a possibility that some of these data call submissions get sent over to Palantir to match up with whatever else they have in their database from the military and all the government agencies that use the same company? It could be that they're using very high-tech forensic analysis to go through it, but I don't know that forensic analysis understands the similarly situated entity rule, non-manufacturer rule, some of the things that we work on every day.
I think that's exactly right. And I think that is to submitting it to a third party vendor and to not have CMMC, especially level 3 protection of data that the government demands is protected, and we get no assurances from SBA that the vendor's cleared or that it's the 8A contractors are really put in a tight spot. I think that there's probably examples out there that you may know about, Sam, that people just want to walk away because they don't get 8A contracts. Why would they want to go through all of this?
Exactly. There's maybe a third or a quarter at least of 8A firms that never get contracts. It's not a giveaway program. We'll be talking about that in a moment and going through some of these 8A facts, but it's not a giveaway program. It's not like you
No.
just get into the program and you start making money. First of all, you have to work for your contracts, and some firms never get contracts. And then secondly, you have this increased compliance burden, annual reviews, and now a data call. And then, as we saw with the Secretary of War's video on Friday, the agencies may be going through your contracts line by line to see what your value add is to their missions. And that's a situation that firms that are not in the 8A program may not be going through. So you have this extra scrutiny and you're under the microscope when you're in the 8A program.
And I think that's right. And I think that's where, when you talk about firms not getting, I think sometimes the numbers are high as 4 out of 5 8A firms don't get contract awards. And I think what people don't realize is how competitive the 8A world is, especially in sole source, people think it's a giveaway program. It's the opposite. It's competitive to get an 8A, a really good 8A sole source award. And I think we'll talk about that later, but I think that's a really important fact that it's not a giveaway program. And when we talk about full and open, and then you look at some of the big contracts that the Department of War is doing sole source with, the vast majority of them are not 8A. They're a teeny tiny portion of the sole source awards. And then some of the companies have been directly the fraud that one company and its subsidiary
Hmm.
really had eclipsed in the same year, 7-year period, all the fines for the 8A program. And they're still doing business with them. So
Well,
it's
that's a great segue into looking at the factual response to these fraud allegations and the ATI video. There's a website that came up online, I don't know, maybe a few weeks ago that you and I have both been combing through. It's called 8afacts.org. Maybe able to get it up on screen here for the viewers. And 8afacts.org, here it is. You should be able to see it here. It looks to start with a map of the United States. And so what are these numbers, Christine, that we're looking at with
I
these
can't see
states?
there's your screen. Okay. So if you zoom out, it shows for this one, and then Alaska's its own beast, so we can zoom back in. But if you look at it, you see the economic impact by state. So this is in dollar figures. Then if you click on the jobs impact, the next click down, right?
Oh, wow.
This, and then you can go, if you drill down, you can even go by congressional district. This is why it should matter to people's in Congress. So if you zoom in even closer, it has congressional districts, right? So it has it broken
Mhm.
down by both the state and then by congressional districts. And then we can also zoom out or zoom in, however you want to do it, and look at defense only. And that was recently added also because of Secretary Hegseth, and I respectfully disagree with his analysis, as did Holly, on how much each state gets in defense money. Alaska has been
Ooh,
called one of the most
Alaska,
strategic.
10.6
Well, look how
billion.
close it is. Literally, Little Diomede and Big Diomede are 2 miles within each other. That's Russia and Alaska. Alaska has been
Hmm.
called one of the most strategic. We're one of the least developed sites for northern development. We have Pacific straight down is the Pacific, straight across is Russia. We're supposed to be one of the biggest things. But if you go down to the continental US, the contiguous new US states, there we go. So if you go just for the defense money, this is why it should matter to people. This is in billions of dollars per state
Hmm.
on some of these states. The smaller states, sure, like Iowa, it doesn't have that big of a footprint. It's in the lowest 5%.
Oh,
because I
look,
guess
if you scroll over it, you get all the detailed information.
isn't
You
that
go over
fun?
to the states. That's great.
So now go back just to economic impact in general. So if you're talking about what the 8A program does for a state, look at how the economic impact. These are people that work really hard. They're fast, they're efficient. They save the government money in overhead costs. And this is the program that's coming under the deepest scrutiny that has the best fraud record. So I'm a little mystified. And I think the white papers and the links, let's go to some of these. So I think the white papers really start off with what this administration's goals are, and they really touch on how it fulfills those goals. Now, if we go to the links, how quickly this will subscribe. So all the papers that are on here can be replicated, including yours, Sam. And so if you look at anybody's data, and this is again goes to the methodology. So if there's like a question on methodology on the map and how people got there and stuff, you can actually contact the people and they'll answer the methodology. But
Oh, wow.
if we go back to the methodology, it's very detailed and it's very conservative. These numbers aren't out of the ballpark. These numbers are on the conservative side. So rather than you actually can depend on the numbers because there's no leaps and bounds. So that's why I think it's really important that it's all, you can duplicate all this. And I think that's incredibly important rather than have clickbait sound bites of 550 million when it was as you said, I think the price of a Corolla.
That is what I said. And even on the high end, if it's 13 million, that's a lot less than the billions of dollars that you saw on a state by state level,
Right.
even in some of those congressional districts. When I was looking at the congressional district that I belong to, it's much larger than the fraud. And remember, that wasn't an annual number for the fraud. That was over 10 years, I think. They had that scheme going. And still, the most that you can find is somewhere between 22,000 and $13 million. I did spend some time looking at these bullet points, and some of the points in the bullet points are consistent with what I found in my article this morning. Veteran participation is very high in the 8A program. If you split all the groups up, veteran participation in 8A by dollars is only behind the ANCs, NHOs, and Indian tribes, but ahead of all the racial categories for Department of Defense spending. And then this point that we were making before, that it's competitive, sole source does not mean non-competitive, less likely to commit fraud, and in fact saves taxpayer dollars. And it comes with the stats behind that, unlike some of the things that we're hearing
Right.
elsewhere.
We're not clickbait. This is actually real things. And so I
Agreed.
think that our reliance on this is good because you can see the methodology. If you have questions about the methodology, you have a source to get it from. I really liked your article that you wrote. I really liked, yeah, all your articles. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
And my practice, I'm in DC a lot. It's so funny because it seems like we talk more when I'm in Alaska than when I'm in DC. I have an apartment in DC and my practice is national. And I've been nationally recognized in both Native American law and in government contracting. And I think I may be one of the only attorneys that has a foot in both lanes that's been nationally
Mm.
recognized for that. And I enjoy that part of it, but I loved your article on what you hit both today and the Corolla argument because I think it hits it. It really talks about that, Sam. I think you should talk about that.
Today I came out with an article trying to figure out if Department of Defense, Department of War is going to levy this sledgehammer against 8A firms. Where is that going to hit the most? And the first place that I saw it hitting was with ANCs, Alaska Native Corporations, particularly within DoD. That is a big chunk of DoD's 8A spending, upwards of 40%. And I made the observation that there's a big Senate race going on in Alaska right now. And there's some people saying that this could become an issue in the Senate race. So does this somehow shift the odds of that Senate race tilting away from the incumbent Republican, perhaps the whole Senate switching? And then after Alaska, the next group that would be impacted is, I think, ironically, white males. Since 2023, and you were part of this discussion within SBA and the 8A community, SBA stopped using racial preferences. And that means that every applicant to the 8A program has a fair chance of getting admission so long as they can show discrimination. And there are reasons besides race or sex to claim discrimination. It could be religion, it could be upbringing, it could be disability. And so you have a lot of service-able veterans in the 8A program. Since that 2023 change, the number of white male-owned firms, or more specifically, non-minority, non-women-owned firms, or non-minority male-owned firms, has jumped 50%. Every other category is pretty much the same, but white male-owned firms have jumped 50%. So it's
No, it's
odd or even ironic that just as those firms are getting a foothold in the program, maybe they haven't had enough time. It's only been 3 years, so maybe they haven't had enough time to get contracts, but they're in the program. And now it seems like defense is going to pull participation out of the program, or at least look very closely at the contracts that are in the program already.
I think that you hit on a couple of really good points because there was an article put out yesterday that white men need not apply. And
Mm.
I was like, oh, opposite. The stats don't actually back that up at all. And then what I don't think people are understanding is how hard veterans get hit on this. Like they're the fastest growing segment of the 8A awards and the 8A, and I think you've spoken to this, Sam, quite a bit. And to cut off the lifeline of service disabled vets, that just it and the Department of War coming out with something like that, I'm a little mystified by that. I'm a little disappointed. My husband was a vet. My husband is a vet. My dad was a vet. People that fight for this country and put their lives on the line, and the families do the same. It's a very emotional reaction from a lot of people. It's a very emotional touchstone reaction.
It's like you said, it's mystifying, it's very puzzling, this action now when the program has shifted already from being race-based to now being fair for anybody who's coming in. And that includes service-able veterans. That's a very
Hmm.
big chunk of the program, and as I showed in the data, even more so than the race categories if you take veterans out of
Right.
those categories.
So, and this
Uh,
think that the social disadvantage is something that people have misunderstood for a very long time. And I think that it's in the statute. It's how do you measure it? And if there's clear objective standards, it's true with the flood, of especially Caucasian males coming in, you can see, okay, but the SBA still has the same reg up that gives it this, and that just
yeah,
drives me
yeah.
crazy. Like,
Yeah. They've had 3 years to get rid of the reg, and
I
it's still
know. So
there.
that
They're not using it at all. I suppose the reason is the case has not finalized yet. They're still waiting for a final decision, but they're not applying a
DOJ
reg. You
has
might as well
said
just
that
take
they
the
will
reg
not
out.
enforce it and filed their
Hmm.
compliance statement. Well, I respect that. I think everybody and the Supreme Court rejected cert on this. It's final. This is as final as it's going to get.
Sure.
I,
The
you
reg is
know,
not in operation.
and I think that the DC Circuit Court of Appeals came out very strongly that the statute was not race-based and that the regs, and then we have Ultima that followed up on that. And so said
Hmm.
regs no good, statute fine. And so we have really good precedent decisions that say, please take that reg down. And frankly, I don't know why people are keeping up that reg, but that's not
And
for me.
that's why you see that 50% increase in white male participation because SBA is not applying that reg anymore.
That's right. That's right.
Christine, one of the things we do on the show is answer reader questions. And I did get a reader question that I'm not able to answer, but you may know the answer. It's about ANC participation in the 8A program. And it asks, wasn't the participation of ANCs in the 8A program in exchange for granting access to, the reader says, oil located on ANC land? And wouldn't the repeal of the 8A program also void that agreement? Please address the oil issue, but also in general, how did Alaska Native corporations receive access to the 8A program? What's the circumstances
So
there?
the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, literally, this goes back to the Nixon administration and Hickel becoming the Department of Interior. There's a lot of history here. But the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, and there's a lot of people that can speak to this, and a lot of Alaska Native leaders were involved in this process as well. Incredibly capable. incredibly smart leaders that came together and did the best deal that they could get. The US, the United States government, and the Congress in particular reserves the power to deal with a tribal organization, and ANCs are considered a tribal organization under ISDA and ISDEA. And they wanted a pathway through Alaska to get the pipeline done. And so in order to do that, Aboriginal rights were never extinguished when the United States bought Alaska from Russia, Seward's Folly, and because the land still belonged to the Alaska Native people. And so the US government had to then negotiate what we would think of prior to this as a treaty type of organization or a treaty type of negotiation, then becomes a congressional law. And it was they wanted a different system. So they put corporations in place rather than tribes and reservations. We have both in Alaska, but there's only one tribe that has a reservation up here, Metlakatla on Annette Island. So we have a different tribal governance system, and the two work together in the best scenarios. Like, it's just like any family. Sometimes you get along, you don't get along, you get along, you don't get along. But ANCSA was definitely to try to get through that land, and a provision of ANCSA is actually participation in all programs that other tribes and that Indian tribes are allowed to participate in. So that's a very clear provision of ANCSA that was negotiated. And I think if I did the numbers years ago, so I'm not sure like how valid my numbers still are, but within a couple of royalty payments, they paid off the entire amount of money that they gave to the Alaska Native people, and the lands that they were supposed to settle are still being settled. And then another nice
Even
thing
now.
they're still being settled. Like, they don't have all their lands. They're still waiting for lands. And then they got given some lands that weren't great. And then they got contaminated lands. And then they got a plan for 100-year cleanup. So 100-year cleanup on contaminated lands from when the military was up here. So they got given a hodgepodge of things that is still being dealt with. And I will say that the Alaska senators, like you were talking about the Senate race in play, they are strong advocates for the 8A program. And the incumbent senator is a strong advocate for this program. He understands it. He understands the lethality that 8A firms can bring to the table. And he sits on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He's a former Marine himself. These people fight, and they're not afraid of that fight. And they know that ANCSA is there. And this is actually something that the tribal organizations, I was involved in the US Supreme Court case representing the Alaska delegation, where we had to say this is a tribal organization, and the US Supreme Court agreed in a very strong decision that it in fact was a tribal organization entitled to self-determination under the Indian Self-Determination Act, which is also ISDA or ISDEA. So that's
And
kind of how
that was
it.
in the CARES Act, right? Back in the COVID
Yeah,
era.
yeah. It was the distribution of the
The
funds for the
benefits of
CARES Act.
CARES.
Ironically, SBA uses the same definition. So ISDA and ISDEA
Oh,
is throughout stuff. So it's an SBA. And so I think of it as with a asterisk, because the SBA uses that and adds state tribes into that mix as well.
sure.
So SBA
Mhm.
goes one step further. That's not unusual. Different programs will adopt that definition and tailor it to its views.
So when the Alaska senators are meeting with, who knows, Pete Hegseth or the head of OFPP or whoever's making these
Right.
decisions about the 8A program, and part of the argument has to be, look, we had a fair exchange here. In ANCSA, ANC's got access to the 8A program in exchange for pipeline rights, land, and if you're pulling that support away, that invalidates the negotiation. Does
It's
that
not
work?
only that, but it's also ratification through multiple court cases, right? I may disagree with Clarence Thomas on some of the things that he says, but he's big on ratification. And so when you have Justice Scalia writing to that on ratification on different cases, you have a Morton Markari, and it's applying to ANCs, you have this multiple times recognized that ANCs are different, as are tribes, there's a footnote in Rothy that said so are NHOs, Native Hawaiian organizations. So you have these types of things that are very important to say. It's not just this. It's this, and this is a power reserved solely to Congress. We get to say what this
Hmm.
relationship will be like.
And you may not be able to say this. I know you're born and raised in Alaska, right?
That's
But I think I can say this. It seemed to me when I first watched the Hegseth video, there were almost specific references to ANCs, or at least tribes. He specifically says the
tribes.
word tribe. He says socially disadvantaged individuals and tribes. And then there's a reference in there to the 20 million. We're going to look line by line through 8A sole source contracts exceeding 20 million. Then he says, and we'll look at all the smaller ones too. If you're going to look at all of them, there's really no reason to talk about the 20 million. There's going to be some special process,
Right.
sounds like, for these 20 million. Who gets the contracts that are over 20 million? It's not the individual owned firms because
Right.
they have a threshold of 5.5 million. So
Sole
all the
source.
contracts
Hmm.
are for sole source. All the contracts that are sole source over 20 million are to Alaska Native corporations, Indian tribes, Native Hawaiian organizations. So this seems,
Correct.
if not targeted, at least with Alaska Native corporations in mind. So feel free to respond to that if you're able to. But at the very least, did you, when you were going through this and understanding that they were looking at tribes, understand that to include ANCs?
I so I don't try to really, how to say this correctly is a challenge sometimes. I don't try to decipher reasoning with that. If it's, I think the 20 million probably ticks something off for me, but with a pointed statement, whether or not it was meant to be pointed, I can't understand the reasoning to begin with, so I'm not going to understand the reasoning in the middle, and I'm not going to understand the conclusion at the end. So when I look at the fraud that has been found in large corporations, and I look at the fraud that is minor compared, we should be eliminating all fraud, waste, and abuse. Let's all say that. That's great. That is a great goal. But let's look at where that is. And it's not lying within the 8A program. Maybe they think it's, oh, it's been hidden, but every time we get these clickbait stories, we actually do the math. And I think the false positives will probably add to that. I think we're going to have a spectrum of results coming back that is going to be a ton of false positives. I think we're going to have some people that not everything's going to be done correctly. I also think that they're going to hit those firms harder than they would have in the past, where they would have done remedial plans. It was a small business, it was this, it was that. I just think with the current atmosphere, it just doesn't, it seems like it's coming from so many different directions with so many of the same talking points that to me, it's a little bit scary for small businesses, which are the backbone of this nation's economy, and the 8A program, which is fast, efficient. Contracting officers, they go line by line through a sole source. FAR Part 15, TINA, Truth in Negotiations Act, which is now Truthful Cost and Pricing Data, but everybody still calls it TINA. You have to certify those calls. You have to do a sweep before you give a contracting officer, and the contracting officer doesn't like it, he's going to the next guy. So if you started a very sophisticated or even semi-sophisticated DOW, DOD contract, what's happened is you may have a competition of 15 guys saying, okay, I'm going to do a sole source award. Then that gets necked down to 10. Then it gets necked down to 7. And then they do oral presentations. And then if you open your books, totally open them. So this 50% markup, that was the one thing that I was like, what? 50% markup? I'm in the wrong business. That's, if you're going to open your books up, nobody's going to see that.
Yeah, I did note that it wasn't all about fraud. There were really
Right.
two points that the secretary was trying to make. One was about fraud, but the other was about value, and he calls it lethality. Are these
Yeah.
contracts serving our lethality? And it says, well, are we paying too much for this? Are we paying 10%, 20%, 50% markup? So that's not really a legal question other than, as you mentioned, Tina and going through your books, but it's more a question of, is this contract contributing to the mission of the department rather than serving some other purpose, which sounds like
I'm
it's
at a loss.
DEI.
I'm at a loss for what the other purpose would be. I'm at a loss why the Department of Defense would be running, I don't know, is running schools, not serving the lethality of if you have somebody going off to fight war and their family lives on a military base, that
Mhm.
not contributed to running schools? Is that not part of it? So I don't know how they would allow a civilian to come in when they're going to, anyway, it's just, I,
From being around the 8A program for decades, that companies are not just sending in reports, they're building buildings. These are construction
right.
companies. They're in the buildings serving the warfighter. They're creating innovative solutions, including some high technology so that we can keep up with other countries and their military technology.
And
It
this
makes it sound like they're just doing consulting work, but that's not
that's
what
it.
the
And
contracting should show.
that was a little bit, that took me aback a little bit. And it took me aback because you're allowed to subcontract a certain amount, and you should. I specialize in what I specialize in. So I will often use other firms, other attorneys, and say, hey, this person's great. I don't do that. And so that's the same when you do the subcontracting, and you have a limitation on how much subcontracting you can do. So those are reports that are given. Again, the 8A program is under scrutiny to do those reports and give them to SBA. Contracting officers can call them up anytime they want. So these are things that are built in already. So I don't understand if people are going to stray off the limitations on subcontracting, SBA will likely look at that and say, is there a way to get back on? Because it used to be a 6-month reporting for IDIQs so that you wouldn't, like if you weren't going to get funded for the next task order, they used to want to see it every 6 months. And that used to be there. And I think that's a plug and play option to have it. Where are you at on this contract? If he's talking about limitations on subcontracting,
Hmm.
all right, that we have that built
You get a
into the
report.
system right now. We already have
Yeah,
that.
and the SBA has a responsibility to put a system together to allow companies to report on their compliance with the limitations on subcontracting. That's in
And
their
they do that.
statute.
It's in the regs. They have to report their limitation of subcontracting compliance. Could they do it easier, Sam? Do you think they could do it electronically? I think they could.
They're talking about putting ESRS into SAM.gov. The other system, FSRS, Federal Subaward Reporting System, is already in SAM.gov. That seems like something that they should be
Yeah.
able to add as well. And then it could be a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about subcontracting, subawards.
And I
So,
think
Christine, you had
Holly,
sent me this, speaking of the benefits of the 8A program, after all of us in the GovCon world were talking about the sledgehammer video. You had sent me this article from a fellow author on Substack, goes by Holly Math Nerd, and the article is called An Open Letter to Secretary Hegseth because his mission must succeed. What did you find intriguing, interesting, compelling in that article?
and these are all posted in the link of the 8afacts.org too. So they're linked up as is yours. I found what I really liked was the discussion of competition. Like how little competition is awarded from the DOW compared to who got the 1.6 in non-8A sole source taxpayer money. If you look at it, it's 1.8% goes to 8A firms, and the vast majority of it goes to mostly the largest primes, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and a handful of other incumbents, the far less scrutiny than the 8A award participants. And that's the video she was. And then what I also liked was how she pointed out the fact on a little bit further down, a few pages down, but from 2018 to 2024, more than 1 in 5, over 22%, Department of Defense or Department of War awards labeled full and open competition received only one single bid. When
Oh,
we
so
increased
even
that
when
to,
it's full and open, there's really
it's a
not
so,
competition if it's just one.
and if you think about that, like you're not going to have Tina and you're not going to have FAR Part 19
Mhm.
coming into play, so you're not going to have the negotiations. So those are far more suspect for fraud, waste, and abuse to me than one or two bids is not really a competitive range. We know this from protest work. The competitive range is usually the top three, and then you just tell your client, don't pursue. If you're in front of the GAO, you're like, let's just not pursue this. You're in number 4 spot, but you don't ever say it. But that's what I
So
found.
interesting because with our small businesses, sometimes they're competing against hundreds of companies on these contracts.
Yes,
You're in a bid protest, and oh, the number of offers on this was 300. And
right.
here you are with most of the competitions, or this large portion of the competitions coming in with just one bid.
and if you think about it, Sam, when you're the only one that's asking questions on a full and open competition, nobody's asking questions. They're only answering yours. You're getting a hint. There's not that many bidders going on, right? And so if you get one person and you know that you're the only one that's been invited or whatever to do a presentation on how you want to do the competition, which you really don't get a lot on sealed. I like the ability of contracting officers to know their contractors, to know their product, to be able to negotiate, and to have the efficiency of doing that, to have the power to get the best price available, and then to be able to move quickly without all the protest mechanisms in place that can drag out. If you're an incumbent, you're going to lose a contract. If you protest, you can get extra days on the contract and earn money just because you're protested. So we know that the incumbent keeps performing. So you eliminate all these costs to the government and all these unnecessary hurdles. You can really zone in on people that are really good performers because you don't get another shot. If you get a bad, like you're done in the 8A program, they're not going to ask you back. Like
Sure, they can find somebody else.
yeah, they're moving down the list. They can ask the business opportunity specialist, give me a list of 10 people. And then they're going to get them. And if you're on that list the first time and you do anything wrong, you don't have to be on that list the second time. They'll just take you off. You know what I mean? There's a straight line through you. So I think
Yeah, and
that's,
that's uniquely compelling now with this emphasis on procurement speed.
yes.
The Hegseth mentioned he'd done another speech. That was what that other speech was about, trying to move more quickly. And 8A sole source is as fast as you can possibly get.
And I think
Then
that was President Trump's True Social post on Raytheon. Like he went after them because, and I think I've seen this in some of the Senate Armed Services Committee hearings where they're going for confirmation that sometimes by the time you get things done, even in technology world, the data's outdated. And so they're still in the R&D phase and people have moved past. So the
in the
knowledge that
commercial
we
world.
learn or we lose in the generational knowledge because people have already tried and failed, we've lost that because we haven't tried and failed and learned from that. We're still in
Yeah.
that caught in that phase. And if you look at some of the fines and pulled up from some of these large contractors that they're talking about, they're dwarfing what 8A has done in the last 7 years.
Oh yeah, it's a matter of public record that one of
Yeah.
the big primes had $950 million of fraud levied against them by Department of Justice. And that's a lot more even than the reported 8A fraud, which is still a lot more than the actual 8A fraud.
So
Um,
in the same
so
7 years, it was like all the fines of 8A combined couldn't hit that one fine, that one that's on the public record hit. It
sure,
couldn't hit
yeah.
it. Couldn't hit
Yeah.
it.
I
So
mean, so what do you think this is all about in this scrutiny of the data program, the data call, the video, and then what happens next? Like, where are we going from here? Is there a movement to somehow change the program to make it more palatable to the folks that are criticizing it? And what ideas are out there?
I think that there's talk of some sort of reforms going around. And there's some things like when you see people talking about limitations on subcontracting, okay, like what you said, is there an electronic way to just put that in? Should it be every 6 months? Should it be something that's everybody's good with? Because these aren't pass-through contracts. That's ridiculous. You make more money when you self-perform, but you can't self-perform 90% of a contract all the time. If you've got to do this service and they put it together for you to do, you may subcontract out. That's totally understandable. So I think things like that. I think things like being pre-vetted, and I think you can speak to this, Sam, of for certain contracts that what the program was called to do. If you want a sole source, is there like a TSA pre-check type of deal, right? Is there a way to do that where you have these qualified firms that are lining up for this work?
That's the way the 8A program was actually originally designed. When I was doing my research for my article, I went all the way back to 1942 when it wasn't even the SBA then, it was Smaller War Plans Corporation, and they were in the midst of World War II trying to find companies to supply the US military. So Robert Wood Johnson was the head of the Smaller War Plans Corporation. He and his people would go out and source small businesses to work with either primes or directly with the military to get them things. So it was for specific purposes, and they get specific companies to do that. It's not the way that it is now where you have 4,000, 5,000 companies and they just go after contracts on their own. SBA played an active role and the military played an active role in trying to match up those companies with the needs of the United States government. So you could move that way again and try to target particular industries. I think that would match up well with the emphasis on domestic manufacturing. There are a lot of domestic manufacturers that are out there that could be put to use by the military, and they're trying to find ways to get to them. But one easy way to get to them is through the 8A program.
I agree with that 100%. And we've seen this big push on manufacturing. We've seen this big push on now Department of War to do this, and the 8A program's in place and ready to go. And I find it very interesting, and I'm so glad that you did that research because I love learning. And thank you. But it goes right along with people not realizing how competitive it is to get a true 8A sole source award and how slim the margins
Totally.
are. Like the average government contract margin, I think the last time I ran the stats on that, it was between 3 and 5%. If you've got 10%, holy gosh, you're doing well. And so when I do compliance checks or checkups, I will ask for any contracts that are over 10% in a margin because I want to take a look at them. So
Oh,
sometimes I'm
okay.
like, unless it's like an IT contract or something like that where they have low risk, construction tends to be the lowest for me when I evaluate contracts and margins. So I actually get my hands dirty and go in. And I
So
find
you
that
haven't seen this 50% then, the 50% brokers?
not one single time. And I would be shocked. I would be the first one to say, you guys, we need to talk about this. You know what I mean? You need to self-report. So I've not seen that. It's not to say that it's never happened. It's not to say that fraud, waste, and abuse doesn't exist. I'm sure it exists somewhere. It's a laudable goal for every one of us. And I think we all strive to do this is to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. But I think that there's targets that are worthy of the scrutiny that the 8A program has received of late. And I don't think it's the 8A program. I think when you look at the big frauds, you can really focus in and you can really see patternistic stuff going on and you don't see it in the 8A program. So I am mystified by some of the attention that this has gotten. And Project 2025, and I think that's worth talking about. They didn't really talk about the procurement side. They talked about strengthening the Office of Advocacy. I think
Right,
that's a
right.
great goal.
Loans and
That's a
advocacy.
laudable goal. Like you and I are friends with
True.
Major. You've known him for a lot longer. He retired, but there's people in there. They need more help. They need more attorneys. They need that. That's what Project 2025 said. They also said the loans and all that. And I believe that they've done those goals. I also think maybe should have been some more scrutiny there. But to me, what was a whole was the procurement piece. And now we're seeing it in a less, I want to say not evaluated process, but a different process. It's just a different process. I didn't find it necessarily objectable when I looked or objectionable when I looked at what they had written on SBA because it wasn't this.
They didn't call out the 8A program.
I think
To try to
that
show that
the
it's not.
competitive sole source, I also think that the no pass-throughs, when it comes down to it and people are saying pass-throughs and beltway bandits and people making all sorts of money, people are rushing to judgment here. And it's almost like you have to prove that you're innocent sometimes. And I find that to be a little distressful. I think President Trump has spoken on this, that you don't rush to judgment. And that if you play within the rules, like when he said, I only paid X amount of dollars in tax, I can't remember what it was. And he said, I'm not disobeying the law. I'm just smart. When you're playing within the rules and you're doing what's right, then you're trying to do your best at what you have in front of you. And I think that goes along with it. Like nobody wants to have a pass-through contract. Like how are you, it doesn't even,
We
if fees are
it's the
reportable.
other end of teaming. It's the way there was a period over the last 10, 15 years where Congress and the SBA were telling everybody, you need to form more teams. to compete
Yes.
for these larger contracts, IDIQs. That's why I
Yes.
created the All Small Mentor Protege program. That's why you see so many joint ventures. You're trying to get small businesses together to team, and in some cases, involve larger businesses if you're talking about mentor protege. And that's because contracts are getting larger. Now, if you're pulling that away and you're saying, oh, teaming, now we're calling that pass through, the small business has to do it itself, then they're not going to be qualified for these. The
That's right.
contracts are not getting smaller. The contracts continue to get larger and larger. And if small businesses are unable to team under similarly situated or joint venture, then they just won't be able to compete for those, and you'll end up with large businesses getting those contracts.
And that is such a fantastic point that this was actually at a congressional direction to go this way, and SBA went this way, and now small businesses are getting kind of stuck to saying it's pass through, and people don't understand how the rules work, or what I take as understand. And again, I'm certain that somewhere there's an outlay fraud, waste, and abuse. But if we clickbait like we did on the 55 million when it turns out to be 22,000, that's the chilling effect that the statements that they have right now, even if they continue to, if it continues to go on, what contracting officer wants to award a contract to somebody that's going to, it's going to be immediately scrutinized. Like they have
Well,
to
what do you see
wait.
happening out of that? Do you see? I was reporting earlier that the 8A program is setting records, highest level ever, and it's probably because of the speed concern. Do you see that going down?
I see it as a possibility, and but I think that the contracting officers recognize who they work with, how well they work, and so it's almost like you think about, okay, I have to get this contract awarded. I have to get it done by a certain time. I need to save money on this. I need to make sure that I'm doing it the right way, that I have a good performer. I have it. So I'm going to do a sole source, and it's going to be competitive for people to do it. I think that there is going to be some chilling effect. I think we've seen it in other programs or in other agencies, and I don't know what's going to come from the Department of War when they continue to on the review, if they follow through, what level they're going to follow through to. But if you knew, if they picked out the $20 million number and they stick to that number, and I have no knowledge that they would or would not stick to that number, but if they stick to that number, what contracting officer is going to award over $20 million?
Like that becomes the new threshold at $20 million.
And $20 million, and this is a really important distinction because these sounds like huge numbers. If you're talking about a $20 million for, say, a construction contract, by the time you take out concrete, structural steel, HVAC systems, that's why it is critical to understand that's the top number. Your net profit is tiny. These contracts, once you exclude the materials, because that top number includes all the materials, once you exclude those materials, that is a very small contract. So if you want to go on a military installation and build a building for the military, you're talking about very small numbers.
And that's over a period of years too. That's not a 1 year
That's
number.
right.
That's for the whole contract.
That's exactly right. And then I do think that it would be nice to see, to not cut off vets from this program, to
Yeah,
educate.
on that, the we were talking about Ultima before and the changes in social disadvantage, and you were mentioning some of the reforms. Are there any ideas as to formalizing social disadvantage in a way that considers veteran status?
I think so. I think that rather than have the narrative that SBA has, or in addition to it, or some type that you could have proven social disadvantage scales that is generally measured with. And I think that's a fairly succinct way to do it, where you grew up as a child, your poverty level for your zip code, things like that. It's a single family household, being a disadvantaged vet. I think these are all things that can be weighed in. And I think it encourages people on an objective scale to say it's a social disadvantage as well. So I think you can have examples, and that's where the essay comes in. And you can have an objective scale as well, but there's no racial presumption. And I think that follows the Harvard case, the Students for Fair Admissions case. I think that follows it exactly. And I think we both are then compliant with that. The reg goes away that says it's presumptively racial. You can tell I don't like that reg is still there because I think people, they rally around that.
Oh yeah, that somebody is suing in Louisiana
right?
for Tulane University using that presumption in a program for Tulane alums, and they're bringing the 8A program into it. So
Yep.
that reg out there is causing at least legal work and potentially some harm, at least reputational harm to the program.
I think that's right. And I think the adoption, a lot of times small businesses are excused from a corporate compliance program. One of the things that I think would be simple would be like people with over 50 employees, check the Department of Justice's website. That's awesome. They have a good corporate compliance mitigation factor. And if you're going to be charged with knowing every single law as a small business, you might want to check that checklist when, if you mess up, what they're going to do, because that list to me is one of the best lists for if you don't have a lot of money to spend on a compliance program and training. That list will get you started. It is one of the primo, it's up on the Department of Justice's website. I think that's great. I know that I would teach webinars for free on any corporate compliance program people want to adopt. I've written tons of corporate compliance programs, corporate compliance. If it's a mom and pop and your wife's doing the books in the next room or you're doing your own books, that's a different story. But if you have over 50 employees, you might want to let them know, hey, there's this law out there and there's this law that we need to really pay attention to. And those are the type of things that you could do over lunch. And I'm enrolling
Right. Already
youth.
the guidance up there on the DOJ website,
Exactly,
link in the show notes.
exactly right. And I think that you and I, Sam, as I try to drag you into more stuff, and we could easily teach some of the basics of corporate compliance or corporate or compliance with government contracting. And if you're an SBA contractor, like what you have to do from everything from hub zone to 8A to service disabled vet, the ownership can get tricky with service disabled vets. So we know that that's
Yeah.
there. I wanted to really thank you for having this program because I think it's really timely and for going through all this too, Sam. This is really, and
Thank
I
you so much
really,
for coming on and explaining the Alaska perspective and the perspective from your clients and the experience that you had in the Supreme Court CARES Act case as well. If people were interested in these issues and interested maybe in the corporate compliance service that you provide, how do they find you?
I'm a little, so outlooklaw.com is my firm, and we're all running right now. We're all running right now to respond to a bunch of different threats. And I think that that's where they find me. I don't publish a lot on purpose. So my link, like even on LinkedIn, you can't reshare my stuff, and I don't put a lot of stuff on my website because I appreciate this opportunity to come and speak because I do have a national presence in DC. I've been in front of the Supreme Court. I've been in front of the DC Circuit. I've been in front of the Ninth Circuit. I've fought for this program for years, and I think that's how you and I became such good friends. We've always been advocates for small businesses, and I think that both you and I are good resources. We tend to be smaller firms. If there's a big, huge thing that comes my way, I reach to bigger firms. And my bench just gets bigger because I tend to be the subject matter person, and then I can reach to a bigger firm.
Yes, it's very important to know what the rules are, know how to read through the SBA regulations and understand how the 8A program works with this extra scrutiny. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Christine. We'll check out the website. We'll put the links into the show notes. Thanks very much for the run through of 8afacts.org. Everybody should check that out.
And it's
And thanks
updated.
for
I
joining the
meant to
show.
tell you that website is updated all the time. So when Secretary Hegseth came out with his stuff, DOW was put on there. Department Awards, War Awards were put on there as a separate click item. So that expect that will be continually updated with facts.
Amazing. What a great resource. Thanks very much, Christine. Thanks for
Hey,
joining.